The Ancient Middle East from Sumer to Persia. An expanded chronological history. Introduction. Why chronology matters. The ancient Middle East often confuses students and general readers because several empires, dynasties, and peoples rise and fall across overlapping periods. The Akkadians, Sumerians, Babylonians, Assyrians, Elamites, Medes, and Persians are not always cleanly separated in time. They interact, conquer one another, and sometimes coexist. This expanded account keeps the story in strict chronological sequence, from the first Mesopotamian cities to the fall of the Persian Empire, while adding many historical details. All dates are BCE unless otherwise noted. Modern country names are placed in parentheses after ancient place names to help orientation. Below is a quick chronological guide. Period approximate dates. Ubaid and Uruk periods circa 6500 to 3100. Early dynastic Sumer, circa 2900 to 2334. Akkadian Empire circa 2334 to 2154 Gutian Interlude, and III circa 2150 to 2004 Isin Lhasa and Old Babylonian, circa 2004 to 1595 Kassites, Hittites, Mitanni, Middle Assyrian circa 1595 to 1155, Aramean migrations and Dark Age circa 1155 to 911, Neo-Assyrian Empire circa 911 to 609, Neo-Babylonian Empire circa 626 to 539, Elamite and Iranian background circa 2000 to 850, Median Empire circa 678 to 550, Achaemenid Persian Empire circa 550 to 330. Part 1. From Sumerian city-states to the fall of Babylon 1. The land and the first settlements. Ubaid and Uruk, circa 6500 to 3100 BCE. Mesopotamia. The land between the rivers lies between the Tigris and Euphrates. The southern part, often called Babylonia in later times, was flat and fertile but required irrigation. Northern Mesopotamia, later Assyria, had more rainfall and a different agricultural pattern. Long before the first cities, during the Ubaid period, small villages in southern Mesopotamia developed irrigation, built temples, and traded with neighbouring regions. By the Uruk period, between about 4000 and 3100 BCE, some of these villages grew into true cities. Uruk in particular became enormous by ancient standards, perhaps covering 250 hectares and housing tens of thousands of people. It was in this urban environment that writing was invented around 3200 BCE. The earliest tablets are not literature but accounting records. Scribes used a reed stylus to make wedge-shaped marks, later called cuneiform, into soft clay. Tokens, seals, and numerical systems preceded this invention. The need to track grain, sheep, textiles, and labour drove the development of writing. This was a revolution. For the first time, human beings could store information outside their memories. 2. Early dynastic Sumer. The first city-states, circa 2900 to 2334 BCE. The Sumerian people of southern Mesopotamia organised themselves into city-states, each centred on a temple and ruled by a king or a priest-governor. Major cities included Eridu, Uruk, Lagash, Umma, Nippur, and Kish. Each city had its own patron deity. For example, belonged to the moon god, Nana, Uruk to the sky god, An and the goddess Inanna, Nippur to the storm god, Enlil, and Eridu to the water god, Enki. Kingship in Sumer was connected to religion. The king was seen as the earthly steward of the gods, responsible for building temples, digging canals, and maintaining justice. The Sumerian king list, a later document, combines historical and legendary rulers. It describes kingship as having descended from heaven and moving from city to city. Some rulers mentioned there, such as Gilgamesh of Uruk, may have historical cause but are surrounded by legend. The Sumerians produced a cascade of inventions. They developed the wheel, the sailboat, the plough, and advanced irrigation. They wrote the first literary texts, including myths, hymns, proverbs, and epic poetry. The Epic of Gilgamesh, though later compiled in Akkadian, has Sumerian roots. Sumerian religion was polytheistic and deeply integrated into politics and daily life. Monumental temple platforms, the ziggurats, dominated the skyline. The economy was based on barley, dates, sheep, cattle, and trade with regions as far away as the Indus Valley, Oman, and the Persian Gulf. Early dynastic Sumer was not peaceful. City-states fought constantly over water rights, land, and prestige. One of the earliest recorded border conflicts was between Lagash and Umma over a fertile strip of land. Earnatum of Lagash, around 2450 BCE, commemorated his victory on the Stele of Vultures, an early monument showing vultures carrying away the heads of defeated enemies. Toward the end of the early dynastic period, Urukagina of Lagash issued a set of reforms that are sometimes called the first social reforms in history. He criticized corrupt officials, reduced certain taxes, and claimed to protect widows and orphans. Though he was soon overthrown, his inscriptions reveal that Sumerian society had legal ideas about justice and royal responsibility. In the northwest of Sumer lay the region of Akkad, inhabited by Semitic-speaking people who shared Sumerian civilization. They lived in similar cities, used cuneiform, and worshipped many of the same gods. The main difference was language. This cultural symbiosis between Sumerian and Akkadian speakers prepared the ground for the First Empire. 3. The Akkadian Empire, Sargon and his dynasty, circa 2334 to 2154 BCE. Around 2334 BCE, Sargon of Akkad seized power in the city of Kish and then defeated Lugal-Zegesi of Umma, who had himself briefly united much of Sumer. Sargon was a Semitic speaker from Akkad, and his rise marked the first time in recorded history that one ruler controlled both northern and southern Mesopotamia. Sargon's origin is wrapped in legend. Later texts say he was born in secret, placed in a reed basket, and floated down the Euphrates before being rescued and raised by a gardener. The story resembles the later biblical account of Moses, but it was a common literary motif for a leader of uncertain birth. Once in power, Sargon built a new capital, Agada or Akkad, whose exact location is still unknown, though it was probably near the confluence of the Tigris and Diyala rivers or near modern Baghdad. He installed his own officials as governors, confiscated land for the crown, and made Akkadian the language of administration. He campaigned widely, reaching the Mediterranean coast, the Taurus Mountains, and Elam to the east. He boasted of having washed his weapons in the Upper Sea, meaning the Mediterranean, and of controlling trade from Magan and Meluha, perhaps modern Oman and the Indus Valley. Sargon's daughter Enheduanna was appointed high priestess of the moon god Nana at Ur. She is the earliest named author in history, famous for hymns to the goddess Inanna. Her writings show that Akkadian and Sumerian religious traditions were fused at the highest levels. Sargon's sons Rimush and Manishtushu faced repeated revolts. Manishtushu left the Manishtushu obelisk, recording the purchase of large estates, perhaps to reward supporters. The empire reached its peak under Naram-Sin, Sargon's grandson. Naram-Sin campaigned from Anatolia to Iran and defeated a great coalition of rebellious cities. He was the first Mesopotamian king to declare himself a god while still alive, writing his name with the divine determinative. The Akkadian Empire declined under Shah-Khalishari. Internal revolts increased, and invaders from the Zagros Mountains, the Gutians, pressed in from the east. By about 2154 BCE, Akkadian central power collapsed. Later Mesopotamian tradition blamed the Gutians for the destruction, but climate change and internal fragmentation also played roles. The memory of Sargon and Naram-Sin, however, became legendary. Later Babylonian and Assyrian kings looked back to them as models of imperial power. 4. Gutian Interlude and the Neo-Sumerian Empire of Ur III, circa 2150 to 2004 BCE. The Gutian period is poorly understood. Sumerian sources describe the Gutians as barbarians who disrupted order. In reality, local city-states probably regained autonomy while paying intermittent tribute to Gutian chieftains. One important figure in this period was Gudea of Lagash, a ruler who was not a king in the imperial sense but a great builder. His many statues, made of diorite, are masterpieces of Sumerian art. Inscriptions describe the construction of the Temple of Ningirsu and the trade missions that brought timber, stone, and metals from distant lands. Around 2112 BCE, Utu-Hengal of Uruk expelled the Gutians. His general Ur-Nammu then founded the third dynasty of Ur or Ur III, the last great Sumerian empire. Ur-Nammu and his successors ruled over a highly centralized state. Ur-Nammu issued one of the world's oldest known law codes, fragments of which survive. He built the great ziggurat of Ur and dug canals to increase agricultural production. His son Shulgi reigned for almost 50 years and transformed Ur into a model bureaucratic state. Shulgi standardized weights and measures, reformed taxation, created a network of royal messengers and roads, and established scribal schools. He also declared himself divine and was celebrated in hymns that praised his learning, athletic ability, and military strength. Ur III was an administrative machine. Tens of thousands of clay tablets survive, recording grain shipments, wool quotas, labour assignments, and legal cases. The state employed thousands of workers, including women and children, in textile workshops. It maintained provinces under governors and a standing army. Yet the empire was overstretched. Amorite tribes from the west pressed on its borders. Shulgi's successor, Shusin, built a defensive wall across the northern frontier to keep them out. In the reign of Ibisin, the last Ur III king, the empire collapsed. Cities stopped sending tribute, and an Elamite invasion from the east sacked Ur in 2004 BCE. Ibisin was taken prisoner to Elam. The fall of Ur was commemorated in the Lament for Ur, a haunting poem that describes the gods abandoning the city and the people weeping among its ruins. This ended the last independent Sumerian dynasty. 5. The Isin-Lhasa period and the rise of Babylon, circa 2004 to 1595 BCE. After the fall of Ur, Mesopotamia fragmented again. Amorite chieftains founded new dynasties in the cities they had once raided. Two main powers competed for control, Isin and Lhasa. The kings of Isin claimed to be the heirs of Ur, while Lhasa grew in wealth and military strength. Rimsin I of Lhasa eventually conquered Isin around 1794 BCE and dominated southern Mesopotamia. In northern Mesopotamia, Shamshi-Adad I created a short-lived kingdom with its capital at Shuba-Enlil. He was an Amorite who conquered Assur and much of the upper Tigris. His sons ruled as governors of Mari and Ekalatum. Thousands of letters from the Royal Archive of Mari, discovered by archaeologists, reveal diplomacy, marriage alliances, trade, and constant warfare. It was from the small city of Babylon, however, that the greatest Amorite ruler emerged. Hammurabi became king of Babylon in 1792 BCE. Through patient diplomacy and well-timed military campaigns, he defeated Elam, conquered Lhasa, destroyed Mari, and brought all of Mesopotamia under his control. Hammurabi is best known today for his law code, inscribed on a black stone stele that was later taken to Susa by Elamite raiders and recovered by archaeologists. The code contains nearly 300 laws covering family, property, trade, agriculture, and crime. It is not the oldest law code, but it is the most complete. Its stated purpose was to bring justice to the land, to destroy the wicked and the evil, so that the strong might not oppress the weak. The penalties were often harsh and varied by social class. The famous principle, an eye for an eye, appears, but so do fines and other punishments. Hammurabi also patronized temples, strengthened Babylon's walls, and elevated the god Marduk to the head of the pantheon. Under his reign, Babylon became the cultural and political center of southern Mesopotamia, a status it would retain for over 1,000 years. The empire did not last long after Hammurabi's death. His son Samsu-iluna faced revolts in the south and the rise of the Sealand dynasty in the old Sumerian region. The north was threatened by Assyria. Finally, in 1595 BCE, the Hittite king Mursili I marched down the Euphrates and sacked Babylon. The Hittites did not stay, but the raid destroyed the Amorite dynasty and opened the way for new powers. 6. The International Age, Kassites, Mitanni, Hittites, and Middle Assyria, circa 1595 to 1155 BCE. The fall of Babylon created a vacuum filled by the Kassites, a people from the Zagros Mountains. The Kassites ruled Babylonia for over 400 years, one of the longest dynasties in Mesopotamian history. They adopted Babylonian language, religion, and culture, but retained some of their own traditions, including distinctive boundary stones called kuduru. Kassite kings rebuilt temples, revived trade, and maintained diplomatic contact with Egypt, Hatti, and other great powers. Meanwhile, several other states rose across the Near East. In northern Syria and upper Mesopotamia, the kingdom of Mitanni emerged. Its population was mostly Hurrian, but its ruling elite may have had Indo-Aryan origins. Mitanni was a major military power, famous for chariot warfare. Its kings corresponded with the Egyptian pharaohs, and royal marriages linked to the two courts. The Hittites, an Indo-European people in central Anatolia, created a powerful empire in the second half of the second millennium BCE. Under Suppiluliuma I, the Hittites destroyed Mitanni influence and became one of the dominant powers of the age. Hittite and Egyptian armies clashed at the Battle of Kadesh around 1274 BCE, one of the largest chariot battles in history. The result was indecisive, but it led to the first known peace treaty between two equal powers, signed by Hattusili III and Ramesses II around 1259 BCE. Assyria also rose again. Ashurbanipal I made Assyria an independent player in international politics. His successors, Adad-nirari I, Shalmaneser I, and Tukulti-Ninurta I expanded Assyrian power westward and southward. Tukulti-Ninurta I even captured Babylon around 1225 BCE and took the statue of Marduk to Assyria. But his assassination shortly afterward shows the fragility of royal power. The entire international system collapsed around 1200 BCE in what historians call the Late Bronze Age collapse. The Hittite Empire was destroyed, Mycenaean Greece fell, Egypt was weakened, and many cities in the Levant were burned. The causes are debated: climate change, earthquakes, migrations, and the mysterious sea peoples all played a part. Assyria and Babylonia survived, but were weakened. Around 1155 BCE, the Elamite king Shutruk-Nahunta sacked Babylon and carried off many monuments, including the stele of Hammurabi and the victory stela of Naram-Sin. This ended the Kassite dynasty. 7. Aramean migrations and the Mesopotamian Dark Age, circa 1155 to 911 BCE. After the Bronze Age collapse, large numbers of Arameans migrated from the Syrian desert into Mesopotamia and the Levant. Aramaic gradually replaced Akkadian as the spoken language of much of the region, and Aramaic alphabetic script eventually became the common administrative script of the Near East. In southern Babylonia, Chaldean tribes settled and formed new political groups. Assyria under Tiglath-Pileser I campaigned widely in the late 12th century, reaching the Mediterranean and defeating Aramean groups. But the state contracted in the following centuries, pressed by Aramean migrations and internal weakness. This period is often called the Assyrian Dark Age, but it was not a complete break. The old Assyrian cities, temples, and royal institutions survived. This era is confusing precisely because the sources are fewer and the political map fragmented. Small Aramean and Neo-Hittite states dotted Syria and southeastern Anatolia. Babylonia was divided among Kassite remnants, Aramean chiefs, and Chaldean principalities. Yet these changes laid the linguistic and demographic foundations for the next great empires. 8. The Neo-Assyrian Empire, Terror and Administration, circa 911 to 609 BCE. Assyria's recovery began in earnest around 911 BCE with Ashurdan II and his successors. The Neo-Assyrian kings built the first empire to unite the entire Near East from the Persian Gulf to Egypt. They did so through military innovation, psychological terror, and efficient administration. Ashurnasirpal II moved the capital to Kalhu, modern Nimrud, and built a magnificent palace decorated with stone reliefs showing wars, hunts, and rituals. His inscriptions describe massacres, mass deportations, and the flaying of rebel leaders. Such brutality was not random. It was deliberate state policy meant to deter rebellion. Shalmaneser III campaigned annually and reached the Levant. The Battle of Karkar in 853 BCE pitted him against a coalition of Syrian and Levantine kings, including Ahab of Israel. The outcome was not decisive, but Assyrian power continued to grow. Shalmaneser's black obelisk shows the Israelite king Jehu bowing before him, the earliest surviving depiction of an Israelite ruler. After a period of internal conflict and Eurasian expansion, Tiglath-Pileser III came to the throne in 744 BCE and reformed the empire. He created a professional standing army, divided large provinces into smaller ones, and institutionalized mass deportation. Conquered peoples were moved from their homelands and resettled elsewhere to break their resistance and integrate the empire. He also campaigned in the Levant, defeating Damascus and receiving tribute from many kingdoms, including Judah. Sargon II completed the conquest of Samaria, the capital of the Kingdom of Israel, in 722 BCE. He resettled many Israelites in Assyria and Media and brought foreigners into Samaria. Sargon also defeated Urartu and built a new capital at Dur-Sharrukin, modern Khorsabad. He died in battle in 705 BCE. Sennacherib moved the capital to Nineveh and transformed it into a magnificent city. He besieged Jerusalem in 701 BCE during the reign of King Hezekiah, but the city was not taken. Assyrian records claim a devastating victory. Biblical texts say the Assyrian army withdrew after divine intervention. The truth may lie somewhere between. Hezekiah paid a heavy tribute and retained his throne. Sennacherib later destroyed Babylon in 689 BCE after repeated revolts, an act that shocked the ancient world, since Babylon was a sacred city. Esarhaddon rebuilt Babylon and attempted to reconcile Assyrian and Babylonian interests. In 671 BCE, he invaded Egypt and captured Memphis, the first Assyrian king to rule Egypt. His successor, Ashurbanipal, was the last great Assyrian king. He completed the conquest of Egypt, though it was soon lost, and defeated Elam. He also fought a bitter civil war against his brother Shamash-shum-ukin, king of Babylon, which ended with the sack of Babylon in 648 BCE. Ashurbanipal's most lasting legacy is the library he assembled at Nineveh. It contained thousands of cuneiform tablets, including the Epic of Gilgamesh, omen collections, prayers, medical texts, and royal correspondence. This library is one of the main sources for modern knowledge of Mesopotamian literature and science. The palace reliefs of lion hunts from Ashurbanipal's reign are among the masterpieces of Assyrian art. The Assyrian Empire collapsed rapidly after Ashurbanipal's death. In 626 BCE, Nabopolassar, a Chaldean, seized the throne of Babylon and declared independence. He allied with Cyaxares, the king of the Medes, an Iranian people from the Zagros. In 614 BCE, the Medes sacked Assur, the old religious capital. In 612 BCE, the combined Babylonian and Median armies took Nineveh after a long siege and destroyed it. The Assyrian king Ashur-uballit II withdrew to Haran and was defeated by 609 BCE. The Assyrian Empire disappeared from history, though Assyrian culture and people survived. 9. The Neo-Babylonian Empire, the last Mesopotamian glory, 626 to 539 BCE. With Assyria destroyed, the Chaldean dynasty of Babylon inherited much of its territory. Nabopolassar and his son Nebuchadnezzar II defeated Egypt at the Battle of Carchemish in 605 BCE, securing control of the Levant. Nebuchadnezzar II is the most famous Neo-Babylonian king. He ruled from 604 to 562 BCE and transformed Babylon into the greatest city of the age. He rebuilt the walls, gates, and temples, including the Ishtar Gate, decorated with glazed blue bricks and images of dragons and bulls. The processional way led through the gate to the Temple of Marduk. The ziggurat Etemenanki, the house of the foundation of heaven and earth, was probably the inspiration for the biblical Tower of Babel. The Hanging Gardens, if they existed, were counted among the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Nebuchadnezzar is also central to biblical history. When the kingdom of Judah revolted, he besieged Jerusalem. In 597 BCE, he captured the city and deported King Jehoiakim and many leading citizens to Babylon. When Judah revolted again under Zedekiah, Nebuchadnezzar returned, destroyed Jerusalem and the temple in 586 BCE, and carried much of the population into exile. This event, the Babylonian captivity, reshaped Jewish religion and identity. The Book of Daniel and many prophetic texts are set against this background. After Nebuchadnezzar's death, the empire declined. His successors were short-lived and weak. Nabonidus, the last king, was an unusual ruler. He favoured the moon god Sin over Marduk, spent years in the Arabian oasis of Tema, and left his son Belshazzar as regent in Babylon. This alienated the priesthood of Marduk and created internal division. By the time Nabonidus returned to Babylon, a new power had arisen in the east, Cyrus the Great of Persia. Part 2. The Rise of Persia from Origins to Achaemenid. Zenith 10. Elam and the Arrival of the Iranians, circa 2000 to 850 BCE. Before Persia, the dominant power in southwestern Iran was Elam. Elam had its own language, which may not be related to any other known tongue, and its own script, later replaced by cuneiform. Its capital was Susa. Elam was an old rival of Mesopotamian states, responsible for the sack of Ur in 2004 BCE and for later attacks on Babylonia. Middle Elamite kings such as Untashnapilisha built monumental sites, including the ziggurat at Chogha-Zanbil. Elamite armies sacked Babylon again around 1155 BCE and carried away many treasures and monuments. Sometime in the second millennium BCE, Indo-European-speaking peoples migrated onto the Iranian plateau from the north. These Iranian peoples gradually split into different groups. The Medes settled in the northwest around Ecbatana, modern Hamadan. The Persians settled further south in the region of Parsa, modern Fars province, from which the name Persia comes. They were initially obscure pastoralists and farmers, often subject to Elamite or Assyrian pressure. Assyrian records from the 9th century onward mention the Medes and Persians, sometimes receiving tribute, sometimes resisting Assyrian raids. The Persians and Medes spoke related Iranian languages and shared many cultural traits. Their religion, later called Zoroastrianism, centered on the worship of Ahura Mazda and a dualistic worldview of truth and falsehood. The prophet Zoroaster, or Zarathustra, probably lived in eastern Iran at some point before the Achaemenid period, though his exact dates are uncertain. 11. The Median Empire, the first Iranian kingdom, circa 678 to 550 BCE. The Medes were the first Iranian people to create a large kingdom. According to Herodotus, the Median dynasty was founded by Dioces, who united the Median tribes and built Ecbatana as his capital. His successors, Phraortes and Cyaxares, expanded Median power. Cyaxares was the greatest Median king. He reorganized the Median army, dividing it into spearmen, archers, and cavalry. He took advantage of Assyrian weakness and allied with Nabopolassar of Babylon. Together they destroyed the Assyrian Empire between 614 and 609 BCE. The Medes then controlled much of Iran, eastern Anatolia, and parts of the former Assyrian lands. Cyaxares also fought a war with the kingdom of Lydia in western Anatolia. The war ended in 585 BCE when a solar eclipse occurred during a battle, terrifying both armies. A treaty fixed the border at the Halis River and was sealed by a marriage alliance. The last Median king, Astyages, ruled from about 585 to 550 BCE. The Persians were his vassals, but the relationship was about to be reversed. 12. Cyrus the Great and the Achaemenid Revolution, circa 559 to 530 BCE. Cyrus II, known as Cyrus the Great, became king of the small Persian state of Anshan in 559 BCE. He belonged to the Achaemenid clan, after which the empire is named. In 550 BCE, he revolted against Astyages. According to tradition, Astyages' general Harpagus defected to Cyrus, and the Median army refused to fight. Cyrus captured Ecbatana and united the Medes and Persians into a single empire. Rather than humiliating Astyages, he kept him at court and treated the Median nobility with respect. Cyrus then marched west. In 547 or 546 BCE, he defeated King Croesus of Lydia, one of the wealthiest rulers of the age. After a siege, Sardis fell. Croesus was spared and became a councillor. The Greek cities of Ionia on the Aegean coast were then conquered by Cyrus's generals. Harpagus subdued Caria, Lycia, and other regions of western Anatolia. Cyrus returned east to secure the Iranian plateau and Central Asia. He campaigned in Bactria, Sogdia, and Arachosia, bringing the eastern Iranian lands into the empire. He also seems to have crossed the Hindu Kush and established Persian control over parts of the Indus region. His greatest victory, however, was Babylon. In 539 BCE, Cyrus marched on the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Nabonidus was unpopular, and the city of Babylon fell almost without a fight. Persian engineers diverted the Euphrates, allowing troops to enter under the walls. Cyrus entered the city as a liberator, not a destroyer. He restored the Temple of Marduk and presented himself as a legitimate ruler chosen by the god. The Cyrus Cylinder, discovered in Babylon and often called the First Charter of Human Rights, records Cyrus's policy of restoring deported peoples and their gods to their homelands. This included allowing the Jewish exiles to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. Whether Cyrus really acted from broad humanitarian principles or from shrewd political calculation, the policy was revolutionary. Instead of crushing local religion and identity, he supported them. making himself acceptable to many different peoples. Cyrus founded a new capital at Pasargadae in Fars. Its simple but dignified architecture combined Persian, Elamite, and Anatolian elements. He died around 530 BCE fighting in Central Asia, reportedly against the Massagetae and their queen Tomiris. His tomb at Pasargadae still stands. 13. Cambyses II and the Crisis of Succession, 530 to 522 BCE. Cyrus's son Cambyses II expanded the empire by conquering Egypt in 525 BCE. At the Battle of Pelusium, the Persian army defeated Pharaoh Psamtik III. Egypt became a Persian satrapy. Cambyses took the pharaonic titles and tried to govern Egypt according to Egyptian traditions, though Greek sources portray him as mad and destructive. These accounts should be treated carefully since they are heavily biased. While Cambyses was in Egypt, a crisis erupted at home. His brother Bardia, also called Smerdis, either was murdered secretly or was impersonated by a Magian named Gaumata. Cambyses died in 522 BCE, perhaps by accident or suicide, and Bardia/Gaumata seized the throne. A group of 7 Persian nobles, led by Darius, killed the usurper. Darius then took the throne, but his claim was contested. 14. Darius I, architect of the Achaemenid Empire, 522 to 486 BCE. Darius I's reign began with widespread rebellion. Almost every satrapy revolted. Darius crushed these revolts one by one over several years. He commemorated his victories in the Behistun inscription, a trilingual text carved high on a cliff in western Iran. The inscription is written in Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian. It tells the story of the false Bardia, the rebellion, and Darius's triumph. It became the key to deciphering cuneiform in the 19th century. Once secure, Darius reorganized the empire. He divided it into about 20 to 30 satrapies, each under a satrap who collected taxes, maintained order, and led local forces. But the satrap was not all-powerful. A royal secretary and a military commander reported directly to the king, creating a system of checks and balances. Royal inspectors, called the eyes and ears of the king, travelled the empire. Darius fixed the tribute owed by each satrapy, payable in silver, gold, or goods. This gave the king enormous revenue while preserving local production. He introduced a standardized coinage, the gold daric and silver siglos, and standardized weights and measures. Aramaic became the administrative language of the empire, allowing communication from Egypt to India. Infrastructure was crucial. Darius built the Royal Road, a 1,500-mile route from Susa to Sardis with relay stations and couriers. Messages could travel much faster than before. He also completed a canal linking the Nile to the Red Sea, allowing ships to travel between Egypt and Persia. These projects facilitated trade, troop movement, and imperial control. Darius built or expanded the great ceremonial capital at Persepolis in Fars. Its terraces and palaces were decorated with reliefs showing representatives of all the empire's peoples bringing tribute to the king. The Apadana reliefs depict Medes, Persians, Elamites, Babylonians, Egyptians, Indians, Greeks, and many others, each in their own dress bringing gifts. This was imperial ideology in stone, the king as the centre of a peaceful, orderly world. Militarily, the empire drew on ethnic contingents from across the realm. The elite force of 10,000 immortals formed the royal guard. The navy relied heavily on Phoenicians, Egyptians, and Ionians. Persian soldiers used bow, spear, and cavalry tactics. Darius also expanded the empire eastward into the Indus Valley and westward into Thrace. But his attempt to conquer Scythia north of the Black Sea failed. More importantly, the Greek cities of Ionia revolted in 499 BCE. The Ionian revolt was supported by Athens and Eretria. The Persians crushed the revolt by 494 BCE, destroying Miletus. Darius then sought to punish Athens and extend Persian power into mainland Greece. In 490 BCE, a Persian expedition landed at Marathon, near Athens. The Athenians, against the odds, defeated the Persian force. Darius began preparing a larger invasion, but he died in 486 BCE 15. Xerxes I and the Persian Wars, 486 to 465 BCE. Darius's son Xerxes I inherited an empire that stretched from the Aegean to the Indus. He first suppressed revolts in Egypt and Babylon. Then he turned to Greece. Xerxes assembled an enormous army and navy. He bridged the Hellespont and dug a canal across the Athos Peninsula to avoid storms. In 480 BCE, he marched into Greece. At Thermopylae, a small Greek force led by Spartans held the pass for 3 days before being overwhelmed. The Persians then advanced and burned Athens, whose population had evacuated. But the Persian navy was defeated at the Battle of Salamis later in 480. BCE Xerxes returned to Persia, leaving his general Mardonius in Greece. In 479 BCE, Mardonius was defeated and killed at the Battle of Plataea, and the Persian fleet was destroyed at Mycale. These defeats ended the Persian attempt to conquer mainland Greece, but the empire remained powerful and wealthy. The Greek wars were, from the Persian perspective, a frontier affair, though Greek sources made them into a defining clash of civilizations. Xerxes continued the construction of Persepolis and ruled the empire until 465 BCE, when he was assassinated in a palace conspiracy. 16. The 5th century, consolidation and Greek entanglements, 465 to 404 BCE. Artaxerxes I, Xerxes' son, ruled from 465 to 424 BCE. Early in his reign, Egypt revolted with Athenian help. The revolt was eventually crushed by the satrap Megabyzus, though on terms that allowed some concessions. In 449 BCE, Persia and Athens concluded a peace, sometimes called the Peace of Callias, though its historicity is debated. This ended the direct conflict between Persia and Athens. Artaxerxes I maintained the empire's internal stability and completed parts of Persepolis. His reign was followed by brief instability. Darius II ruled from 423 to 404 BCE. During the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta, Persia supported Sparta, providing money and ships. In return, Sparta acknowledged Persian control over the Greek cities of Asia Minor, according to later agreements. Egypt revolted again near the end of his reign and became independent for about 60 years. 17. 4th century decline and revival, 404 to 330 BCE. Artaxerxes II, who ruled from 404 to 358 BCE, faced a major challenge from his younger brother, Cyrus the Younger. Cyrus gathered an army, including 10,000 Greek mercenaries, and marched east to seize the throne. The two brothers met at the Battle of Cunaxa near Babylon in 401 BCE. Cyrus was killed, and the revolt collapsed. The Greek mercenaries, stranded deep in the empire, fought their way north to the Black Sea. Their story, told by Xenophon in the Anabasis, revealed to Greeks both the wealth of Persia and its military weaknesses. Artaxerxes II's reign saw constant diplomatic maneuvering between Greek city-states. Persia shifted its support between Athens, Sparta, and Thebes to prevent any one power from becoming too strong. The King's Peace of 387/386 BCE reaffirmed Persian control over Asia Minor and made the great king the guarantor of the peace in Greece. Yet Egypt remained independent, and several satraps revolted in the 360s BCE. court intrigue and palace murders weakened royal authority. Artaxerxes III, who ruled from 358 to 338 BCE, reasserted central control with ruthless efficiency. He reconquered Egypt in 343 BCE, ending the last independent native dynasty. He also punished rebellious satraps and strengthened the royal army, but he was assassinated by his own courtier Bagoas, and his son Arses was killed shortly afterward. The throne passed to Darius III in 336 BCE. He inherited an empire that was outwardly vast but internally fragile. At the same time, Philip II of Macedon had unified Greece and planned an invasion of Persia. After Philip's assassination, his son Alexander the Great carried out the plan. 18. Alexander and the fall of the Achaemenid Empire, 334 to 330 BCE. Alexander crossed into Asia in 334 BCE and defeated the Persian satraps at the Battle of the Granicus River in northwestern Anatolia. In 333 BCE, he met Darius III himself at the Battle of Issus in southern Anatolia. Darius fled, leaving his family, treasury, and royal tent behind. Alexander then moved down the Mediterranean coast, capturing Tyre after a long siege and securing Egypt, where he was welcomed as a liberator. In 331 BCE, the decisive battle was fought at Gaugamela in northern Iraq. Alexander's smaller but highly disciplined Macedonian army defeated the vast Persian host. Darius fled again. Alexander then entered Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis without serious resistance. In 330 BCE, he burned the palace of Persepolis, an act that came to symbolize the end of the Achaemenid Empire. Darius III was murdered by his own satraps while fleeing east. Alexander, presenting himself as Darius's rightful successor, pursued the assassins and eventually conquered the eastern satrapies. With the death of Darius III, the Achaemenid Empire came to an end, but the Persian legacy lived on. Alexander adopted many Persian customs, married Persian princesses, and kept much of the satrapal administration in place. His successors, the Seleucids, ruled from Babylon and continued to govern a vast territory that included most of the old Persian Empire. Later, the Parthians and Sasanians would revive Persian power in new forms. Conclusion: the legacy of the ancient Middle East and Persia. The story from Sumer to Persia is not a simple sequence of empires replacing one another. It is a complex web of cultural exchange, conquest, adaptation, and administration. Sumerian city-states invented writing and urban institutions. The Akkadians created the first multinational empire. The Babylonians developed law and literature. The Assyrians built a terrifying but sophisticated imperial machine. The Persians replaced terror with tolerance and created a model of imperial governance that would influence every later empire, from Alexander to Rome to the Islamic caliphates. From a modern perspective, none of these ancient states would be acceptable by today's standards. They were monarchies, slave societies, and military empires. Kings claimed divine authority and crushed rebellion with extreme violence. Women had limited legal rights, though some, like Enheduanna, rose to prominence. Mass deportation, forced labour, and tribute extraction were normal. The Assyrian mass deportations were particularly brutal, and even the Persians, often praised for tolerance, put down revolts with force and executed rivals without hesitation. Yet these ancient societies also produced achievements that still shape the world. Writing, law codes, cities, organised religion, diplomacy, roads, standardised weights and measures, and the idea of a multi-ethnic state governed by a single ruler all began here. The Cyrus cylinder's policy of religious tolerance, whatever its motives, offered a different model of empire than the Assyrian one of terror. The